Hey, hope everybody's doing well. What is today? Friday. We're already up to Friday, and sorry for the late start. I have been sitting here trying to get all the graphics loaded, and that takes a while, actually. December 16th, Friday here, and we've got a major system coming through the Great Plains, and let's take a look at that. This is the infrared image from the GOES satellite, and you can see it looks mostly like a dry system. We don't have a very well developed comma system like we usually see with these deep lows coming out of the Rockies. Even the moisture feed coming up north looks pretty shallow. What we're seeing here on the infrared imagery, not a whole lot, mostly high clouds, and I'm calling it high clouds because of the enhanced red and yellow. As far as the low clouds, which are going to be the darker shades, there's not a, you can see a little bit of that, mostly stratus, but not much mid-level cloud. North of that, you can see some of the cold stratocumulus in Kansas and Nebraska. And let's take a look at that on the surface chart. And we've got a lot going on here. You can see in Kansas a lot of 20s and 30s with a north wind there. In Arkansas, pretty much the same story, very cold. Got 40s there with a old polar air mass that still continues to remain pretty cold. And that's contrasted very sharply with this very warm air coming out of the high plateau area. And we talked about that yesterday. With Chihuahua, they were up to 80 degrees. And with that westerly wind, we get those 80s coming off the plateau with downslope flow. And that really warms up that air mass. We had a high of 81 degrees in Wichita Falls, and Abilene and Childress were up above 80 also. And where's that cold air? Front is looking something like that. And this is the cold front coming out of Canada. Now, where is the warm front? That becomes a little more tricky. Let me get this positioned. And you might be tempted to kind of start with a small scale. Maybe you see 32 to 47 degree difference here in southeast Kansas, or maybe this 37 and 51. Probably a better thing to do is look at the large scale picture. So we have 20s up in northern Missouri. And let's look down off the Gulf here. We have 68, 69 here in Louisiana, 70s offshore, 67, 69 in East Texas. So what I'm looking at is differences along this line. And remember, with fronts, it's where the transition begins on the warm side. So we go from 70, 68, 71, 69. Okay, we're continuing to be in that warm air. Then 63 falls off a little bit, 63 here. Now we go from 53, 49, 37. That's more significant. So possibly we're looking at the warm front to be in this area right here. And we can do a similar thing up along this line. We go from 70 to 61, 68, 59, 58, 54. Then maybe it drops off to 40, 54, and 47. So we kind of continue to do that process, and we get a frontal position probably like that right there. So let's recenter the map and draw that out. Okay, so the warm front is going to be roughly like that, and then that transitions to a very well-defined cold front, and that's unlike what you see in California and Oregon with those systems coming out of there. Then the other player we have is a dry line. Dry line is active because we've got the contrast between the tropical air, the recycled polar air, and the dry plateau air coming off the Mexican plateau with downslope flow. So we're going to put that dry line, let's see, probably from about Oklahoma City to about Mineral Wells, Abilene, and then southeast to about right there. So for the dry line, we use symbology kind of like that. Kind of like open pips there that are brown. And then the warm front, of course, is going to be like that. And then the cold front, there we go. So that's kind of our frontal analysis, and we can actually throw in the low pressure like that. So that's my Microsoft Paint frontal analysis, and that works pretty well. Downslope flow right there, moisture coming up from the south, and here comes that Canadian air. Let me check over on the chat and make sure our feed looks good. Okay, no complaints. Dense fog advisory in Wichita. Yeah, they've got that front barreling down south, and there's a lot of trapped moisture back in there. You can see that trajectory. That's one factor. We've got a lot of moisture north of the warm front, and with that rapid cooling in the wake of the front, that's going to condense that, and we're going to get a lot of fog and stratus. Let's take a look out west and check the western periphery of that front, because it does kind of trail into the mountains, and that's kind of an important thing to be concerned with. In fact, if we look at the temperature anomaly, you can see a huge difference right here, very big contrast. Below normal conditions in Montana. This is kind of like the coldest, most unseasonably cold air of the United States, right there in Montana, with the most unseasonably warm air in southern Colorado and parts of Utah. So this is the main contrast in the United States right there. So we need to find that at the surface and maybe get some practice with that. So we're looking at Wyoming here, Utah, and Colorado. You can use a similar principle, just kind of like draw a line from south to north. So we go from 45, 50 in the Four Corners area, and that's certainly unseasonably warm for this time of year. That's normally a very cool area. We have 50 at Grand Junction. That's very warm. And then we start seeing it fall off to 30 up here in northwestern Colorado. I don't know what city that is. And then 27, 4, 0, and -3 at Billings. So that's a pretty strong change there. Now, if we can see northerly winds all the way down here. So you can use that as one indicator, but the temperatures are going to be your main distinguishing feature. So 50 to 36.27, that's going to be the front right there, and we can just carry that on down this way. So basically it goes from northeastern Utah. Interestingly, see if I can get that out. Interestingly, I was looking at this area a couple of days ago. Believe it or not, the U.S. has a major tar sands deposit. It's got 50% of the crude oil locked up in the rock formations there. 50% of the oil reserves in the U.S. So I guess if oil prices go up, this is going to be a huge drilling area right there. I had no idea about that. So right there through that future tar sands area. And then down towards the Nevada test range, or Nevada Nellis range, and then down to Bakersfield and Vandenberg Air Force Base down there. So this is the front as it goes through the Rockies, the Central Rockies. So north of that, here comes some mixed Pacific air and Canadian air. Probably the Canadian air itself is kind of banked up like this. So you see these winds here in Montana. They're more northeasterly. This is the denser, colder air filtering in from that way, and that's contrasting with the cold Pacific, British Columbia offshore air right there. So you can see there's a little bit of a secondary front in that region right there. So there's a lot going on here on the maps, and going back to the temperature anomaly map, there it is, and you can kind of trace out where the front is earlier today. This is at 18Z. Very cold in the northeast U.S., but not a whole lot going on, just kind of under, I guess a lot of it's under high pressure there. And let's see what else is going on. I pulled up the Aqua and Terra satellites. I was checking this out. Here's Texas right here, and you can see this is the air behind the dry line. And this is the air along and north of the warm front. And this is mostly consisting of stratus. The tops on this are probably up at about 2,000 to 3,000 feet. In the north of that, you can start picking up a little bit of the higher cloud. And that's signified by kind of a change of texture of the cloud type. There's less of this transverse banding that you see right here and more of a streaked appearance here. But really, that's where the infrared imagery really picks that out right there. Anyway, that's a current infrared image, and this Aqua image was earlier today, probably about 18Z or so. And this is the visible image that we had earlier today. You can see that cool stratus and stratocumulus over East Texas. The warm front at the time was roughly like that, and then we picked up the dry line out in this region earlier today. Okay, and I guess we can just pull up one SCU-T and look at Fort Worth. And were they north of the warm front at the time? Yeah, they probably still were. I can see a little bit of maybe a frontal inversion right there. This is at 0Z. Let's see, where did we have the front? Yeah, front just passing through there. So anyway, above that looks pretty dry actually. So they're getting a little bit of the dry air riding up above that shallow surface layer. And I guess we can go ahead and look at Oklahoma City too. They're definitely going to be closer. Actually, let's look at Springfield, because they're going to be well north of the warm front. And here you see the frontal inversion marked very clearly, topping out at about 6,000 feet right there. And below that, very strong cold air mass signature right there. Temperatures at the surface near freezing. Okay, let me see if we have any questions here. There's a question about the Shreveport sounding. Something about the warm temperatures and steep lapse rate coming off the Mexican plateau. Yeah, in a dry line situation, your layers aloft are going to tend to be part of the air behind the dry line, and that's what we call the EML, the elevated mixed layer, and that's what you see right here. And that consists of the air behind the dry line. If you track that to the west, you're going to see that layer kind of become lower and lower, and it's going to have the same characteristics of potential temperature and moisture that it does on the ground at Midland and Amarillo. And what I'm talking about there is if you take that layer right there and you track it all the way down to 1,000, that's going to be about 30 to 32. Then we go out to Midland, bring that down. It's about 22. That's a little bit cooler, but you can see it's still quite warm there. And dry too. And then below that we have the cool polar air mass and the little bit of that tropical air riding on top too. Okay, so that's going to bring us to the forecast. That's enough about the analysis. And Jason says we had 4 ongoing fires in the Texas Panhandle today. Yeah, this is big fire weather conditions with low relative humidity. That downslope flow is really you can see the dew point is quite a bit lower than the temperature. There's a spread of about 30 to 35 degrees, and that's going to be a relative humidity of about 20 to 30%, maybe lower, maybe 10 to 20%. And of course the winds, that's going to be bad for fire conditions. So what do we got going on over the next 24 hours? Let's take a look and roll the charts forward. This is what's going to be happening over the next 24 hours. Then when we do the webcast tomorrow, the surface system is going to be well to the east. So that's going to pass overnight, and in the wake of that, we're going to have the Canadian air come southward. And we're going to have our blue norther come through Texas, You can see a little bit of that trailing snow showers coming in through Wichita and north of Oklahoma City. And that'll move southward overnight, and only areas, I guess, east of I-35 are going to get that precip according to the GFS model. A little touch right there of freezing, or actually snow. Is that snow? No, I think that's sleet it's going for right there, as that column cools with that frontal passage. So we're going to, normally behind cold fronts, you're going to see a transition from rain to snow. And north of a warm front, that's where you're going to actually mix in freezing rain and sleet and those kinds of things. Okay, then for Sunday, high pressure moves in, and you can see the 540 line coming into Dallas, Fort Worth, and Little Rock, so pretty strong cold air advection. Then for Monday, more of the same. High pressure just kind of dominating the eastern U.S. and Mississippi River Valley. Strong low pressure up in Canada, and a little bit of a lee side low in the northern Rockies. Plateau high over Utah and Idaho. Then for Tuesday, we're going to get a surface system developing in Montana that's going to be kind of a northerly pattern, so kind of a northerly storm track, and that's probably telling me that we've got a little bit of a zonal flow developing across the northern states. And you can see kind of a dramatic warm-up in Texas and Oklahoma. We got the 564 line working in from the southwest and a southerly gradient in Texas. So for a webcast on Wednesday, we're going to be looking at this. There's that northern system coming through Minnesota and Wisconsin. Very large Pacific high starting to develop over the Great Basin area right here. Looks like that'll bring a little bit of cool air into the southern plains. The 540 line comes back down south again. So this is basically going to be another frontal passage here. So let me roll that back. So that's going to be the frontal passage on Wednesday right there. So that's going to blow through 1034 high over Texas. And then for Thursday, high pressure over Texas, remaining very cool over the Mississippi River Valley. The day before Christmas Eve also looks pretty quiet, but you can see the thickness line starting to gather in this area right here. And they're actually kind of tight in this area, a little bit of cyclogenesis. So this is probably our next wave starting to come together. Christmas Eve, now that wave does pull out, and there's our next system coming through Texas and Oklahoma. So it looks pretty dry right now, and that's probably because we have limited moisture coming off the Gulf. So a little bit of shower activity developing east of Texas, and this indicates the models have kind of backed off on the precip for Christmas Eve. So we're going to get a frontal passage overnight in Texas. Should be pretty windy here. Then for Christmas Day, high pressure moving into Texas, and a lot of cold air advection across south central and southwestern U.S. Then through the 26th, just kind of cold, 540 line all the way down into Dallas-Fort Worth. And then, let's see, where are we at? 27th. Looks like it's pretty dry. Another system comes through the South Plains, or the Southern Rockies. That looks to be kind of dry also. And then it get a bit of a change there. I guess we've picked up some Gulf moisture at this point. So this is on the 30th, and that appears to be a pretty well-developed system. Chance of thunderstorms in Alabama and Georgia as that moves through. And then we get up to our first chart of 2017 here. Got an East Coast system. Of course, this is just kind of a WAG, but there you go. Upper level system located right here. The main baroclinic system over Virginia and Pennsylvania, and quiet through the rest of the U.S. And unfortunately, I don't have the building blocks set up for today. I was kind of late putting this slideshow together, so I'll have to wait till tomorrow on that one. Let's see. Let me check over the chat. Felix says, would it be okay if I share this? Yes, please. We could definitely use more viewers. It's been kind of slow because we haven't had a whole lot of active weather. I expect with our first major thunderstorm outbreak, we're probably going to see a lot of viewers come in here, but we could definitely use some now. That would be great. Very cold weather in San Francisco Bay Area, and 4.29 inches of rain in Southern California. Yep. Glad California finally got a reprieve there from that long drought. Anyway, I appreciate you watching, and hopefully we'll see you all tomorrow night. Thanks, and yeah, we'll see you then.